Well, I wonder if there's a link between anger and, lack of imagination. A very orderly person constrains their imagination because, it's not reliably productive, of course, whereas order is. So one loves certain scientific activities, including, say, logical analysis, mathematics, physics, and so on, because they're greatly studies of order. But advances in even these areas don't happen without imagination. If we think of flying, the fact that birds can fly suggests that, solid objects are able to fly in invisible air, Does that mean we have to fly the way they do in order to be able to fly? I mean, clearly we don't have wings and so on. No, we're going to have to use a technology. So they practice, and everybody thinks they're nutters, jumping off of cliffs, with artificial wings, that there's no way the human body has the wherewithal to flap such, and so on. It's known that you can glide, as with a kite. The Tibetans were, of course, very early on the monks were practicing with manned kites, and very dangerous it was too, of course. I mean, you needed an upcurrent of air, which required, dangerous sort of mountainous country to be utilised in this respect. And, of course, your landing could break your legs and everything else and smash you to pieces. Because, of course, the wind itself is quite variable, and you don't have the adjustments that a bird does on the wing. And you're not flying as the birds that take off fly. You're flying as like a gull that glides. Or some of the predators just hover, don't they? They're gliding, We're told that, for instance, our passenger airline planes, the shape of the wing relies on the Bernoulli principle of the air going over the top of the wing, having to go further than the air under the wing when you charge forward, and therefore there's a lift. This is very true, but if you think of the early planes, they were flat wings. They weren't aerodynamic in this way. They were relying just on forward thrust and, I think, angle of pitch of the wing, so that the air is pushing the aircraft up as you force it forward with the engine. And of course you needed a technologically able, competent engine to generate the power and be light enough to lift itself. You could produce the power, but it's very hard putting a diesel locomotive into flight. You need something much lighter, So our imagination gives us the notion, by looking at the world very often, I wonder if we could learn to fly in some way. How could we use our technology? And, eventually you come up with what seems absolute genius. You are able to fly now, and at phenomenal speeds, but you've used a totally different method of flying to the birds. They're not using forward thrust jet engines. And in a sense, you can fly much better than the birds, but you haven't got the same versatility and economy of flight by any means. But fantastic distance and speed. And numbers of people, all crowded together flying. So you look at one of these airliners and you think, my goodness, there could be 250 to 500, 600 people up there. And it's just a small area in the sky, and it doesn't look as though it's going very fast compared to its length at that distance. and just think, it's just astonishing. And it is astonishing. But do you see the role of both order and technology? If you're order and imagination. If you're over the top on imagination, well, we all know you're just a lunatic and you're a menace, you're just trouble. And it makes those who are very keen on order quite angry. You know, they think, oh, this is just unreasonable. I don't want this person's company. And fair enough, because from the order person's point of view, it's introducing too much chaos. You know, that doesn't mind the odd minor glimpse of what could be possible and then pursue it, but something that needs to be well within the range. I get the impression that some people are extremely orderly. They appear less imaginative in that they're not constantly talking about crazy ideas, so to speak, from their point of view. And they get quite angry and frustrated when their order is being turned to chaos by the extremely imaginative. You know, the off-the-page sort of ideas. And now, what's wrong with, of course, extreme imagination is if you also back it, because there's so much uncertainty in the imagination field that the chances of you being wrong at the present are very high. And if you now, jump off a cliff because you're just convinced you need enough upthrust of wing to be able to glide, that's very true, but your management of the situation is such that you dash yourself to pieces on the rocks below. And they don't wish to be dashed to pieces with you. And if you're leading their society in that direction, they get very angry and concerned. Are they more angry than imaginative people? I don't think so. Imaginative people feel incredibly frustrated by persons that are very orderly because they won't listen to the possibilities. And therefore you can't build, you can't advance your field of understanding and competence because of a lack of imagination that's allowed in social interaction. And so science and all the professions and so on start to ossify. They turn to stone. They believe in a past theory that's becoming less and less tenable given actual advances that are being made in understanding and ability to create. Now, we have a social problem here, don't we? How do we get some balance? How do we get enough of each? Well, we try to keep the too imaginative away from the too orderly, and try to get the best of both in society. Put the two together, you get an explosion. Keep them utterly apart and you get nowhere. It's something like that. It's 7:23 and I've got to take the kids to school. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. We could say in passing that it's helpful if the most imaginative keep the less acceptable imaginations off the social discourse playing field, and it would help too if the more orderly are as forgiving as they can be of the imagination that the imaginative do suggest. So moderation in both fields would possibly help the situation. That's fairly obvious, isn't it? I have a friend who's regularly made comment is, well, this hasn't told me anything I didn't already know. And this is largely because he's not really truly listening to, and sometimes completely shuts down on some imaginative things that are being suggested by other members of the group. So he doesn't listen to those, and the things he does listen to and says, yes, that's true, but I knew that already. I think it's a killer to creativity. I'm not sure how to rescue him from such, especially as I'm probably one of the major people in the imaginative group that's vocal at times, that says too often something that he doesn't accept and want to agree with or think about. So from his point of view, well, this is just make-believe, the assumptions you're making are not valid, and I'm just an irritation to him. So he gets angry. And fair enough, that tells you to back off fast. My usual solution is to agree with him on anything that he says that I do agree with, and, well, not be hostile to him. But even so, it takes some time for him to calm down, and in other circumstances, when we're on something where he's holding forth on his what he would feel is a more scientific field, and I'm appreciating what he does understand in that regard, things are happy again on a more social, acceptable intercourse in that sense, you know. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. Well, another point that helps is in social chat with each other is to listen very carefully to the other person and simply respond to the bits you do find you accept and you think are helpful and you wish to build on yourself, rather than play the game of contradicting, that can't be so because of such and such, and then they reply, but that's not so because such and such, and you go backwards and forwards just winding each other up, and the divide gets greater and greater. Agreeableness can help, not such agreeableness that you're never in a situation where you are able to discuss what you feel is important, but you need the right company. It's not reasonable to attempt such with company that's not going to be open to those sort of ideas. So we are cautious. You know, it used to be the rule you never talked about religion, politics and economics in societal mixing, you know, parties and societal contact. This, of course, ends up with an extraordinary hypocritical society of deadlock, really, as regards progress. So it's not a good idea to have that sort of lack of social interaction. You know, you just end up with empty-brained societal mindless chatter and so forth, get nowhere, and you think, oh, the whole of life becomes trivial. So choose your company. Those that have ears to hear, great. If they don't have ears to hear, don't keep ramming it down their throat. They get angry with you. Or in the case of the imaginative, they get just exasperated and emotional in other ways. You know, subtly when people start to get sarky with each other, you know you've gone too far. Thank you, Heavenly Dad.